I have seen the most interesting happenings. It would be a waste to go back to sleep just yet.
Koudelka is a venture into the world of combining elements of survival horror with the JRPG, similar to what games like Parasite Eve did around this time frame. On the gameplay front, Koudelka is alright. It was a compromise result. The game's director wanted a more survival horror direction, while the other staff wanted something more like a traditional JRPG. While it has some interesting ideas to its combat system, it's a bit undercooked, and the execution could be better. It's not Koudelka's greatest strength. That comes from its narrative. Koudelka has one of the better stories I've come across in the game. A historical fiction backdrop, Koudelka has what I'd call a mature story. Not as a result of violence and blood, although there are plenty, but how it tackles its themes. With three strangers brought together to this location on this fateful night. Koudelka dives into themes of religious faith, life, death, love. It does so in a way that you don't see many other games do. Add that in with the dialogue scenes are shot like a play and some of the best voice acting you'll ever hear, and you end up with a slam dunk of a narrative. One that helps make up for some of Koudelka's shortcomings on the gameplay front.
I am not bound to please thee with my answers.
Do all men kill the things they do not love?
Hate any man, the thing he would not kill?
And I thought all outlaws read just simple, stupid poets. You read Shakespeare. You're smarter than you look.
That makes two of us.
Before we begin, thanks to fellow Boulder Punchers who give extra support to the channel through Patreon or YouTube memberships. If you'd like to receive early access to videos, be featured in credits, receive periodic updates, my undying gratitude, consider joining. If you'd like to join the Discord, check the pinned comment or description. It's October 31st of 1898, the tail end of the 19th century and the dawn of the 20th. A lone hooded figure on horseback is making their way through the countryside of Wales. This is such a fantastic intro. Simple, yet full of wonder as this traveler navigates the land. Reminds me of the intro to Shadow of the Colossus. Music is sparse throughout Koudelka, and this track here is sparse in instrumentation. A haunting vocal melody is the main focus, adding to the sense of wonder and mystery. Nothing flashy or fancy, but does a better job than most intro cutscenes of getting me invested. The hooded traveler has come to this monastery. This is Koudelka, our title character. With the front entrance locked, she climbs up the monastery to find a way in. In the process, she loses her pendant. She comes across a wounded man. This is Edward. When I first saw him, I immediately thought of Billy Bob Thornton. We'll come across our first of many monsters during this meeting.
You're too early, Angel. I'm not dead yet.
Not yet, but it looks like you're going to die soon.
Maybe. But you'll have to pardon me while I tend to some unfinished business first.
Business? What can you possibly accomplish in your condition? You can't even hold your gun steady.
Well, no unless I try. That thing's not gonna die unless I shoot it 2 or 3 times.
After vanquishing the monster, we'll get some more insight about these two characters. Koudelka mentions she's a medium, but remains tight-lipped of what brought her here. Edward gives his own reason, hearing a rumor about the place and the potential thrills it can offer.
I know I look pretty shady, but you don't look too wholesome yourself.
No, I'm not like you. And this is no place for people like you. Why did you come here?
I heard a rumor.
A rumor?
I heard something in London. That the son of some rich family bought an old monastery. Spent a ton of money to convert it into a house. I heard he brought quite a lot of harlots here. Seems like he was having a great time.
So, where is this monastery?
That's what I want to know.
They team up to discover the mysteries of this monastery, each with their own reasons and motivations to be here. Jumping ahead a bit further in the story, a third companion will join our merry band of adventurers. This is James, a bishop from the Vatican and a man of devoted faith. Like Koudelka, his current reason for being here is unknown, but this will unfold over the course of the game.
Almighty God, please give me the strength to ward off these monsters.
I can see that we've wasted our time here. Let's go, Koudelka.
Just a minute. Although I'm under the protection of the Lord, it doesn't hurt to take precautionary measures. I think I'll go with you.
3 strangers, each with their own reason of being here. And they're not exactly chummy with one another due to the different beliefs and motivations. But they'll put their differences aside to explore the mysteries of this monastery and search out what they seek. Will they find that? Well, we'll have to wait and see how things play out. Koudelka has a gameplay flow that pulls more from the world of survival horror for exploration, mixed in with the random encounters of JRPGs. The game makes use of a staple of this time frame of the late 90s and early 2000s, the pre-rendered background. While they do a great job of building out the atmosphere, they can be a bit static. They don't have the detail something you'd find in a Capcom or Square title from this time frame. On the note of Square, Koudelka's developer, Saknoth, had many ex-Square staff. Its founder was a composer for Square titles, but hold that thought for now. The development team make trips out to St. David's Cathedral in Wales for inspiration and for research. While there is a lot of care put into these backgrounds, there are some unfortunate cases of pixel hunting, where you're hitting the examine button to double check the environment. It wasn't as clear as something like a Resident Evil title of what you can interact with. Koudelka's head will snap to certain points of interest to help the player, but not all the time. And there are a few issues with exploration that can arise with the use of fixed camera titles. That being some of the awkward camera cuts between screens. With the placement of some of these camera cuts, it can be easy to find yourself turned around. Does the edge of the screen lead elsewhere or not? There was one room early on where I got turned around and resorted to my map to realize, wait, there's more to this room. That door placement connects elsewhere. There's another door I missed. Not a huge red flag by any stretch, but something to make note of. Considering this was a late 1999 release in Japan, mid-2000 in the West, a bit disappointing to see. This kind of camera usage had more or less worked out its kinks from its earlier days. On the note of the map, it can be quite vague to get a handle on at first. You can find a map that fills in the blanks later, but I found myself taking more time than usual to get my bearings around the monastery. Areas are distinct. While Koudelka makes use of shortcuts and backtracking, it's not to the extent of something like a Resident Evil. There are a few points where I'd open up shortcuts and think, okay, where am I again? Where does this connect to? It's been a while since I was last here. It took a bit more time to register where I was. There are points where you'll find these color keys and remember locked doors from earlier. The map will have these on display so you can find your way back, which is a godsend in some cases. You may remember the general area, but how to get back there may take a bit more time. And like any good survival horror protagonist, Koudelka, both the game and character, knows when to throw away a key when it's no longer needed. Koudelka has a unique save system that tackles some common problems you find in JRPGs and survival horror, or saving in general. You want to have that tension between save points, yet you don't want to frustrate the player by having long stretches without them. I'm sure we've all had those frustrating moments where you need to stop playing a game but there's no save point nearby. Something that's far less an issue with modern games, and even playing Koudelka with an emulator. I mean, I could just use a save state, but Koudelka comes up with a save system that addresses these issues. There's 2 types of save points, one which heals your party up. These tend to show up after a boss fight. Then you'll have the temporary save option. Many rooms throughout the monastery, upon entering, will show the room name along with a nest symbol. We could either continue or make a temporary save. There's only 1 slot for it, and saving won't heal your party up. The end result is a convenience, but it's not a free lunch. There's only 1 slot allocated to a temporary save, and it doesn't have the benefit of healing you like the other save points. It's a nice compromise to give that player that out if they need to stop playing for whatever reason. Again, I'm sure we've all had those moments where you have to stop playing to go somewhere, or mom and dad tell you it's time for bed. There's no save point in sight, so you go just a few more minutes as they get more and more frustrated with you. Their tone gets more and more angry. You could hear them arguing with one another, wondering where everything went wrong. So budding game developers, this is a mention number 31 of a mechanic you could lift from another game. I know this is far less of an issue in the modern day, but if you're having a game with limited saves, this is a nice little compromise to give players an out if need be in a pinch. Part of the exploration equation of Koudelka involves puzzles. Several progression puzzles. Find key items to use elsewhere. And there's several key items we pick up that we won't use for some time, as in a disc or 2 later of the game's 4 discs. Now, in a previous video I mentioned how much I can love this trope. In the game Overblood, for example, you receive an item early on in the game, one that won't have usage until its end stretch. One of those, aha, that's what it's for moments. Too bad Koudelka fumbles the ball with this trope due to its inventory system. In Koudelka, you'll pick up several stained glass pieces that sit in your inventory for some time, but we have limited inventory slots. The game spreads items across various categories: weapon, armor, accessories, and tool. These key items like the stained glass are in the tool category, along with consumable items. Now, it wasn't an issue right away, but there were a few points where I'd go to pick up one of these key items only for Koudelka to say the inventory's full. So we have to go into the menu to discard or use some consumables to free up room. On the usability front, it's a bit of an annoyance how using a consumable like a potion kicks you back a couple menu layers. So if you want to use a few potions to heal up, you're going through a few menu layers to do so. It's not like you could use multiple potions at once. Small usability issue, but one that can stack up over the game. So when I finally found these places to use these key items, it wasn't a aha kind of moment. It was, thank God I now have more inventory slots sense of relief. Not sure why they didn't keep a separate category for key items and keep consumables on their own. Again, it wasn't like I had to discard items on the regular to free up room. It didn't occur at the game's beginning, and it was only a short stretch before I found the areas to use these key items. But there was that short stretch where my inventory was overflowing and I had to find something to discard each time I found a new key item. On the note of these stained glass key items, there's a bit where I thought we'd have what I like to refer to as the regurgitated puzzle. One that's oh so common in survival horror titles, and one I'm not a fan of, where you find information elsewhere, take a screenshot or memorize it, and replicate it elsewhere. I use the term puzzle loosely here, of course. Putting these stained glass pieces in place, Koudelka will recognize the Greek characters, one we saw in a lock earlier. So I take a screenshot of it to use when I get back to that lock. Let's see how this puzzle goes. Well, no, there's nothing to solve here. The three amigos solve it for you without any player input. It's like they ran out of time to come up with a puzzle and put this in its place instead. There is one notable puzzle I want to bring up, that being this music box. Step into the room and this melody will play. Use the panels on the ground to replicate the melody. Now, I like to think of myself as someone with a decent level of musical inclination, but man, this was a bit of a stumper and trial and error affair. These melodies can blend into one another. Did that one repeat again, or was it a slight variation? I had to leave and re-enter the room several times to hear the melody again. That's the tricky element with music puzzles. You don't want to make it too easy, but you have to have some distinct element between them, especially when you have to consider most people tend to be a bit tone deaf. I like to think this is a puzzle the game's director came up with. The director, who also composed the game's soundtrack and before founding Saknoth, worked as a composer for Square. Someone with a strong sense of musical inclination. One that would be easy for him, but can veer into frustration for those less inclined and more tone deaf. Tormented Souls, one of the better survival horror games to come out in recent memory, had this issue as well with a musical puzzle. So budding game developers, do be aware if you have some kind of puzzle with musical elements. If you need to, do something more like the one in Resident Evil 3 Nemesis than what you'd see here. The combat encounters of Koudelka are a bit of a mixed bag. There's some good ideas with various levels of execution. Some do well, others are a bit spotty. The game makes use of a grid system for combat encounters. You're free to move around during your turn a certain distance, but you can't move into the same row as an enemy. That said, they can't do the same. They can't pass a row if one of your characters are there. So if you have Koudelka in the back row throwing out spells, which she specializes in, having Edward tanking out front will prevent enemies from reaching her, at least with physical attacks. They're free to throw spells around. Koudelka specializes in magic, Edward is the tank in dealing out and taking damage, and James can go either way. I had him in the back grid with Koudelka, either using a gun for ranged attack or spells. With guns, you need a clear shot at the enemy you're targeting, and you'll need to reload while you're out of bullets, eating up a turn. At any point in combat, you can swap out weapons, which eats up a turn. There's a wide variety of weapons you could choose. Weapons can have various status effects, elements attached to them, but they can also have large impacts on our stats. Some will reduce our agility, giving us fewer combat turns, but boost your strength and vitality. Others may boost your agility and give you poison attacks, but reduce your strength and vitality. It's a bit annoying that in combat you can't see how switching weapons will impact your stats. That can only be seen in the menu outside of combat. So why not stick with the weapons that deal out the most amount of damage? Well, weapons will break after a certain period of time. Something that took me for a surprise the first time it happened. I did read the manual beforehand, but I must have glossed over it. That said, it did make sense when it happened. Why else was the game giving out all these weapons? There's no JRPG store here in Koudelka. You'll find gear throughout the monastery and the occasional drop from standard enemies and better gear from bosses. Koudelka is generous in handing out levels to your characters. It is rare for me to finish a fight and not have at least one character level up. where you get 4 points to allocate to your stats. That said, you don't want to dump them all in one. If you're focused on strength of characters like Edward, you'll still need some dexterity so you can hit your enemy. For casting spells, intelligence will boost attacks, but you'll need to keep your points up in mind to ensure they hit. That said, I never had a case where they were all out of whack and my attacks were missing on the regular. The Piety stat, which is a great fitting name for the game, determines your mana and your protection against magic. But if you pour too many points into it and get out of alignment with intelligence, that can backfire, or healing spells won't work on the given character. I didn't have this issue, but it's an interesting way of ensuring the player doesn't dump everything into one stat. You have to have some semblance of balance. You can level up spells by usage. Once you hit a certain threshold, said spell will upgrade to the next level. Spell radius will increase to hit more tiles with these level ups. Same go for your weapons. Use a certain type of weapon enough, and your character will have a better handle on them. While not a long game, especially in comparison to your typical JRPG, Koudelka does offer a wide variety of enemies and bosses to deal with. There are some inspired designs here, especially on the boss front and the further you get in. There's quite the monstrosities that you'll come across. Bosses don't appear in the environment, but you will have ample warning. Koudelka will mention as you enter a room that something's not right. That's your cue to check your equipment and your health before progressing forward. But Koudelka does have a common issue that most JRPGs or RPGs in general can suffer from. They give you all these options that you could do with your attacks. Some weapons allow you to drain mana from your enemies, or paralyze them, poison them, silence them. The thing is, most bosses will be immune to these kind of attacks. And as well, for about 99% of encounters, you're better off hitting them with your most powerful spells and weapons. The breaking weapons can throw in a hurdle and a bit of a layer of strategy. Even then, weapon durability is quite generous. And the further in you get, Koudelka herself more or less demolishes everything in her path if you put your points into spells. And these encounters can be slow. Not in the sense that spell animations are these drawn out affairs, but it's between the actions. Trade out a hit, throw out your spell, and wait until the next action. There's a bit of a pause where the game's loading in the background of what to do next, something that adds up over the course of the game. And most spells and standard encounters are a cakewalk. Demolish them with your most powerful spells, have Edward up front swinging away. But there are a couple bosses that are the exception. A dark side Phil favorite, the puzzle boss.
This is a puzzle boss. I hate puzzle bosses.
Well, I use the term puzzle in the loose sense here. There's one fight we'll have against a human, a thief who drops a chandelier on us before the fight. At the beginning of the fight, we can't hit him. Spells will miss, and you can't reach him for a physical attack. Well gee, what are these boxes and barrels doing here in this fight? Wonder what happens if I get rid of them. Ah, there we go. That said, this thief is still immune to spells for whatever reason, but not to weapons. And this boss fight has a noteworthy follow-up scene. We'll have a chat with the man afterward and learn more about the monastery and its caretakers we come across earlier. But then we have one of those awkward moments where the gameplay clashes with the narrative. Edward shoots him dead, and Koudelka and James are in shock.
Still, he did try to kill us. For that.
What did you do that for?
Hey, you two, remember that fight we had but a few moments ago? What were you trying to do then? JRPGs are a common victim to these kind of moments of the narrative clashing with the gameplay. Koudelka avoids most of these trappings for the most part, although we'll get a cutscene incompetence moment later on. There's another boss fight later on in the game that had me stumped for a bit. Sometimes my spells would hurt this monster, other times it healed them. So what's going on here? Well, you want to watch its movement. When it starts to do this wiggle, spells will heal it. When it stops wiggling, spells will deal out damage. But even with this realization, this boss did take longer than I was hoping for. Depending on a few factors, spells may have a bit of a delay from queuing up to when your character uses them. There were a few times in this fight where I had a spell loaded up and the boss changed their state. Now when that spell unleashed, it healed them. It became a tedious affair of hoping that I get the timing right on spells. Add in the sluggish pace of battles and you end up with a bore. So while the combat system isn't bad by any stretch, it doesn't quite land its execution. But there's one element that makes up for the combat system, that being the music of encounters. Music is sparse throughout Koudelka. For large stretches of exploration or in dialogue exchanges, there's no music. Only the background ambience of the monastery, but that changes during combat encounters. When I first heard the main combat track, I thought to myself, that's what they're going for? Huh, it's not very JRPG-like. It's more understated, low-key, but sunk into my bones after a few encounters. I'm humming it in my mind while I write this. It's a great track, but things get even better with the boss track. This one gets the head nodding. A more up-tempo track than standard encounters. Its starting melody and instrumentation gives me an ancient Egypt kind of vibe. It's one of the better tracks I've heard in a JRPG. You can thank Hiroki Kikuta for these excellent tracks, as well as a large chunk of Koudelka. Beyond composing the music, he directed, wrote, and produced Koudelka. He was the founder of Saknoth, acting as its president and CEO. So his hands were full here. Hiroki Kikuta was Squaresoft alumni. He composed music for a few games, including Secret of Mana, but most notable being Trials of Mana, the sequel to Secret of Mana. And that's what's known as these days, but in my heart of hearts it would always be Seiken Densetsu 3. The sequel to Secret of Mana that for many years never had a release outside of Japan. It didn't receive an official release until 2019 and a remake in 2020. Seiken Densetsu 3 is one of those landmark titles for a young Boulder Punch. I got introduced to emulation through an older cousin, blowing the doors wide open to older titles. One of those being Secret of Mana. I played through it with one of my friends. The older brother of said friend introduced us to Seiken Densetsu 3. Hold up. There's a sequel to Secret of Mana that's never been released outside of Japan, and dedicated fans tweak the game's contents to create an English translation? You could do that? To say this blew my mind as a youngster is an understatement. And my goodness, what a game it is. During a time frame when Square was putting out classic after classic, this is one of Square's best titles. And its soundtrack by Hiroki Kikuta is one of my favorites in any game. Now, Hiroki wanted to move from a composer into the director's chair at Square, but their business structure wouldn't allow for it. Through an acquaintance, he got in contact with the chairman of SNK. He laid out the frustrations he had with RPGs, and what he wanted to do differently. He left Square and founded Saknoth in the spring of 1997, taking a few other Square members with him. SNK helped to fund the company, but gave Saknoth the creative freedom to do what they wanted. Hiroki Kikuta composed the tracks for Koudelka within 6 months, saying it was a straightforward process. And while he had many hands in many areas of Koudelka, one he gave little oversight into was the gameplay and combat, one which he came to regret. While he pushed for a more survival horror approach to its combat, the staff were reluctant. After all, he brought many Square alumni with him. They wanted to stick with what they knew. The end result being a compromise, a JRPG combat system. While it does have some tweaks to the formula and interesting elements like weapon durability, it was a compromise and not the director's intent. Not a bad combat system, but it makes me wonder what he had in mind. What if he had more of a say in the gameplay, and more time to work on it? How would they handle it with a 3-party system? Would it be something like the first Parasite Eve, something like Parasite Eve 2, something else altogether? But that wasn't to be the case. The end result being a compromise that works, but leaves me wondering what could have been. Where Koudelka doesn't compromise is on the story front. It's by far Koudelka's greatest strength, and one that outdoes most other games to this day. It's a case of the game pushing the technology at the time, while also dealing with the constraints of the aging PS1. One element pushing the technology was motion capture. Game director Hiroki Kikuta wanted something different instead of going the route of hand-drawn animations. He wanted to motion capture the performances of 4 people at once, along with the audio, at the same time. With the technology he had access to in Japan, this wasn't possible. But there was a company well versed in the world of Hollywood that could, that being Futurelight. During this time frame, they did motion capture work for the 1998 film Godzilla. You're talking some of the best in the industry here. Some talent that would go on to lead companies like Industrial Light and Magic. They were up for the challenge that the Koudelka staff had in mind. Now looking at it today, it doesn't seem like much, but this intersection of cutting-edge technology with the constraints of the aging PS1 results in an approach that helps Koudelka stand out. During these dialogue scenes, there's no camera cuts. It's like watching a play. It's very theatrical. You may have a character come and go off screen, like entering or exiting a stage. Something you don't see many games do, but they tend to take a more cinematic approach. While a different case, Clock Tower 3 stands out in a game round by also having a stage-like approach to its cutscenes. But that's less of having no cutscenes and how they moved around, And there it could be a very silly affair, where it felt like characters would burst into song at any point. But what also makes a difference for Koudelka is the clear distinction that this was all shot together and in one take. It's not a case of getting the motion capture and dubbing in the dialogue later on, where the actors come in and read their lines and the developers stitch things together, which works fine for most games, but there's moments that are oh so difficult to capture if it's not everyone in the same room at the same time. Most notable being when our merry band of three interrupt each other.
Rubbish.
All those deaths are rubbish?
They're all liars and thieves anyway. This is still a monastery. This is still God's house, prison or no. Why all those liars and heathens are killed is none of my concern.
How could you possibly say a thing like that? That doesn't sound very priestly.
I am not a priest. I am a bishop.
I don't give a rat's ass what you are. Look, I'm not saying that all of those people were saints, okay? But that doesn't mean that they should be put to death.
You saw that old couple. They're so well-mannered, kind. You think they're killers?
Good manners?
Yes.
Think about it. Why would they leave the place such a mess?
I don't know.
You think they'd at least bury the bodies?
Possibly.
Anyway, I have this strange feeling we're not alone with all these bodies and ghosts.
Now with the lower polygon count, your mind will fill in some of the blanks, like facial expressions and mouth movement, but Koudelka does a fantastic job with the gestures of the characters to make up for it. There's this one moment where Koudelka stamps her foot out of frustration, and it conveys so much of how she's feeling at that moment. But what helps Koudelka blow so many other games out of the water is the quality of its writing and the voice acting. I knew beforehand that Koudelka had great voice acting, but I still wasn't prepared for how much it impressed me. Even to this day, it stands head and shoulders above most other games. Back at the turn of the 21st century, this would have more or less made everything else look like Bush League, which makes it puzzling when you look up the actors of Koudelka, Edward, and James. They held auditions in the Hollywood area as that's where they did the motion capture. It shocked me to find out this is more or less it for them on their IMDb pages. Edward did voice some characters in Warcraft 3, but that's about it. Their performances here should have opened up the floodgate of incoming voice acting roles, though I couldn't find any further information on them, so who knows why. I would have hired them in a heartbeat with performances like these. It's interesting how these dialogue stretches are the game's reward for you progressing and not the FMVs. Now, Koudelka does make use of FMVs, and while they're well done, they pale in comparison to these in-game scenes. They drop the play-like approach to something more traditional. They have their purpose, but they're not the standout element of the narrative. Plus, they could have these awkward, jarring cutoffs at the end instead of fading out that could be taking you out of the moment.
You always blame everything on the savagery of pagans. Are all men of the cloth like that?
It's senseless to tell you this, but the truth is...
What the?
Of course, you could have the best actors in the world, and that matters little if the dialogue isn't up to snuff. See the countless video games, shows, or movies over the last decade or so for many such examples. But Koudelka is a case of a rather simple story told with pinpoint precision. The story unfolds at a pace that moves things forward, but gives events time to breathe. 3 distinct characters, all strangers before this night, converging on one location. They're all brought here for different reasons. Edward gives his reason for being here when we first meet him. But for James and Koudelka, these take time to reveal themselves. Even then, they're in bits and pieces, each withholding information until later in the story. The end result is an uneasy alliance and plenty of conflict between the 3. Most notable between Koudelka and James. One point of conflict arises amongst the 3 is their stance on Ogden and Bessie Hartman, the caretakers of the monastery. Before James joins the party, Edward and Koudelka will join them for food. Edward is trusting while Koudelka passes on the food, which turns out to be the right call on her part.
Did you want?
Oh, yes, please.
Thanks. It smells great.
Wouldn't you like some, dear? Don't you like potato soup?
No. It's not that. I'm all right for now.
You wasted all of that food. What's wrong with you?
Yeah. If it weren't poisoned, then I would have had some.
Pardon?
I said, if the soup weren't poisoned, then I would have had some. Got it?
Poisoned. No way.
Just a little bit. I smelled some poisonous plant.
What's that?
I can tell you how you're going to feel. In about half an hour, you won't be able to move your body. If you don't find an antidote, you'll definitely die.
So they really were trying to kill us. But why?
Don't know. But it seems they're quite used to doing it this way. They must be hiding something.
Despite what they've gone through, James refuses to believe that the couple would do such a thing. This leads to some heated arguments amongst the three. It's not until coming across a thief does James begin to accept the truth.
Yeah. Strange. Even if I were used to seeing dead bodies, I'd be vomiting.
So it is that couple. But why?
Fools! How could such a kind and faithful couple be cold-blooded killers? This is the work of jealousy and greed. And pagans born of savagery, immigrants. I will not be a party to such abusive slander. This is so unpleasant.
But where most of the conflict arises in these talks are through faith. James, coming from the Vatican, is a man of devoted Christian faith, one who places himself into the hands of the Lord. While Edward is indifferent, Koudelka has some choice words about the faith and James and religion.
Poetry.
Poetry should delve into the depths of the souls of the faithful and others. It should inspire the soul as to Alexander Pope or George Herbert.
If they have the power to do away with these evil spirits, I'd choose anyone. Even that dear old carpenter's son.
Blasphemous! Pagan! How dare you utter such words of sin?
To seek help from someone you've never met before is ridiculous, especially when people are dying from hunger every single day in London.
They're all filthy and immoral little beggars that deserve to die.
Now, in the hands of a sloppy writer, having these kind of arguments can turn to a juvenile fare that detracts from the story, where it could turn to all those juvenile arguments you see online between an atheist and a believer. I use the word juvenile here as that's what the game's director, Hiroki Kikuta, felt most JRPGs were with their stories. He wanted to write a more mature story, and that's the best word to describe Koudelka's story. Mature. Not mature due to violence, blood, and gore, although there's plenty within, but it's how the game tackles the themes it does and the way it does. Tackling religion is a common trope of JRPGs, but the writers tend to come up with their own religion, instead of using one from the real world. Something that Koudelka embraces with open arms in its historical fiction approach. There are events and figures from history who make appearances mixed in with the game's fiction. They use this time frame of the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th due to its intersection of science, superstition, and belief, where technology began to budge with great force into shaping belief. What we end up with here are several exchanges of clashing beliefs. Koudelka in particular is not a fan of what the church has done. She's not afraid to call it out to James, and at times points out his hypocrisy. But James doesn't roll over and remains devout in his faith. But you'll have these moments where each will get through to each other, where they begin to see where the other's coming from. And there are moments throughout the game where James' faith will face great testing, where there are signs of it wavering in the face of adversity and his companions. And to be clear, it's not a case of the game telling you, the player, religion is bad. Tackling real-world religions is not something many games do, and for good reason. In the hands of a bad writer, it comes across as forced, hacky, or bringing up that word again, juvenile. In a way, it reminds me of the Silent Hill series, most notable being the second entry. A story that dived into dark themes that you don't often see covered, and for good reason. You miss the mark and it comes across as tacky and tasteless, but in the hands of a skilled writer, it can enhance the story to become something that outshines many other stories. Where it can be, again bringing up that word, mature. Koudelka handles the implementation of the Christian faith with grace, no pun intended, where it doesn't slam you over the head with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Instead, it's a mature approach that stuck with me long after the credits rolled. And how the characters' arcs play out over the course of the game is something to also commend. While they have much conflict with one another, there will be moments where they let their guard down with each other, where they better understand and trust one another moving forward.
Koudelka,
Yeah?
don't get killed.
Same to you.
There's a game highlight of a scene between Edward and Koudelka that's about 9 minutes long near the end stretch. If you played the game, you know which one I'm talking about, but we'll get back to that scene in a bit. Koudelka gets an A+ when it comes to Storytelling 101. It doesn't weigh things down with tons of lore, but instead focuses on a small cast of characters and their motivations. Whereas I was waiting for the next major dialogue scene to see how things would play out. With that, let's go through the major beats of Koudelka's campaign. As mentioned during the intro while talking with Edward, Koudelka is a medium. There's this one scene where she reveals what brought her here to the monastery. It was the cries of the spirit of a woman. In a game full of knockout scenes, this is near the very top, where Koudelka makes use of her abilities to channel the spirits through her. We learn more about the dark past of this monastery, one that's been here for hundreds of years.
Tortured. And, thousands of them.
Kill them! They cut off my fingers. They crushed my legs. They smashed my head and cut out my guts. They took everything from me. They locked me up and chopped my body.
Oh, my eyes! Oh, my ears! Oh, they're burned! Help! Help! How horrible. This place used to be a prison. For hundreds of years, kept in secret. Whoever went against the authorities or misconducted themselves in any way were locked up here and killed.
No! Don't touch me! You piss off! Go to hell!
It's a fantastic showing of how strong the voice acting is. With the low poly count, you can't see their mouth or facial movements, where the mind fills in some of the blanks. But you do have the body language. It's one of those scenes, especially when the voice changes, that could have come across as cheesy or silly. And hey, the early days of survival horror were full of cheese, but that's not the case here. It's a terrifying ordeal where I'm hanging on every word spoken. We'll come across the spirit of a young girl named Charlotte, one put to death many years ago at the age of 9.
Hey. Hey. Wait a minute. Hey.
Edward.
You should have just died for me. I wanted you to lay down and die. What a waste. Such a terrible waste. My name's Charlotte. Not that it means anything. Not that you have a prayer. I'm talking to 3 dead people. Nobody's gonna save you. Nobody.
So you died here as well?
Yes, I died here too, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. They locked me up in here right after I was born. They beheaded me the day I turned 9. Happy birthday. I've been trapped here ever since, and no one even knows who I am.
On the note of actors here, a young Sarah Paxton plays Charlotte. She's an actress who's had a prominent film and television career since her childhood. Although looking through her list of credits, I don't recall anything she's been in, with the exception of Twin Peaks: The Return. Dougie talks to her character while he's at the casino. The game's best FMV has Koudelka once again tapping into the spirit of the woman who summoned her here. We get a name for her, Elaine. It's a short barrage of occult imagery, a scattershot of memories out of order. One that seems incomprehensible at first, but watching it back after beating the game, it becomes far more clear. This is an example of where the FMVs can get in the game's way with how the scene ends. The abrupt cut to a loading screen instead of letting the scene fade out, or doesn't give the scene time to breathe.
December 5, 1895. Rain. I found out that 320 chicken pigs and 43 pigs were purchased from a supplier in town. Rain. How I have been waiting to conduct Elaine's resurrection ceremony. Now I only long to sleep in peace with my wife.
Elaine, I just want to make you happy. Will you marry me?
That woman was Lane. She summoned me here.
So we now have a foundation to why Koudelka's here. What about James? There's a scene where he's looking for something among shelves of books, but can't find it. A short stretch later, he gives more insight of what he's looking for, but before that, we get a dose of humor in a game with up to now has little.
What? What is that? Is that just a mummy? Cross your fingers.
That was disappointing.
Holy Savior! The secret of the Fomors from the bottom of the sea. Immigrate!
This figure in the coffin made mention of the Emigrate document, and James spills the beans.
I'm on instructions direct from the Vatican. There is a manuscript. It's said to be somewhere in the building.
And that manuscript is?
Right. It's called the Emigrate document.
Is it very important?
For hundreds of years, it was kept deep inside the Vatican library. No one was allowed to read it. In fact, many people thought it didn't even exist.
That's weird. So why is it here now?
Somebody stole it.
Stolen? From the Vatican?
Right.
No way.
Not many people could steal a thing like that from the Vatican. You really have to know the place, or have enough money. According to our secret investigation, however, the wealthy gentleman who purchased this monastery bribed someone within the Vatican to steal the Emigrate document for him.
Wealthy gentleman?
Yes. Patrick Hayworth. My friend.
But it's not like it was priceless art or something. Why would he be interested in a thing like that?
For years, Patrick has dabbled in mysticism and alchemy. He's on the brink of crossing the line, playing God.
Playing God?
Creating life, Edward. It's thought that the ancient druids' forbidden secrets on eternal life and resurrecting the dead are contained in the Emigrate document.
I can't believe that.
Of course, it's just silly superstition. That's why I'm here, to try to convince Patrick to drop his dangerous experiments and return the Emigrate document to the Vatican.
And don't worry, that skeleton in the coffin, that's not the last we're going to see of him. Disc 2 ends with the party splitting. The gargoyle attacks the trio, separating Koudelka from James and Edward. Here we have a JRPG staple with the gargoyle, the unbeatable boss. That said, it's not a case of where the game continues if you die. You die against this gargoyle, it's a game over. But it becomes clear within a couple of rounds that you're going to need to run away. No matter what, your spells and attacks will do nothing against it. But it's also a chance for you to grind out some spell usage to level them up. As mentioned earlier, once you use spells a certain number of times, it will level up. The gargoyle gives you plenty of turns before making its way over to attack to you, so might as well take advantage of that before hightailing it out of here, because a good stretch of Disc 3 will have us playing solo as Koudelka. Separating the party is one of those tricky elements to do right in a JRPG, but Koudelka does a good job of it here. There's more tension, but unless you're playing like a dummy, Koudelka lays waste to anything in her path with magic. With a few exceptions, combat encounters haven't exactly been difficult up until now. Now you have to take into consideration that you don't have Edward or even James to tank damage. It's not a case of the game throwing you to the wolves with that one party member that you've made little use of. I'm sure many of us who played Final Fantasy X, we were going, uh-oh, with that one encounter that Kimahri fights solo. Or if you're like me, you made little use of him up until that point. But Koudelka doesn't have these issues. There's no other characters that we'll play as, or party members we could swap in and out. Remember that pendant that Koudelka dropped in the game's intro? Well, we can now pick it up. And it's got some decent stat bonuses. And you'll want to pick it up, else you end up with one of the game's first endings when the time comes. We get case number 2 of the gameplay clashing with the narrative. Everyone's favorite cutscene incompetence. Rogden gets the drop on Koudelka and restrains her for execution. That said, the game does an okay job with it. Koudelka has another horrifying vision through her medium powers, leaving her open to a sneak attack. What follows is one of the game's darkest scenes, where we learn more about the caretakers, Elaine, and her husband Patrick, the owner of the monastery. This is also a time where the abrupt ends to FNVs work in the game's favor.
Are you awake? These ruffians! You harlot! Strumpet! Have you no shame? Oh, if only Elaine had been saved.
we wouldn't be in this mess.
Elaine?
Yes. She was merciful. She was benevolent. She believed me, and she was fond of my paintings.
Your paintings? The sun.
It wasn't my fault! All of a sudden, there was a cold ship out of nowhere. It was dark. What could we do? It sank so fast. I was faultless. Elaine. Poor Elaine. If only I'd stayed with her. Hey, you! Hey, how's that? Just a lamp? I'll make you just a lamp!
You're crazy!
Shut up!
Honey, let's stop this now. It's time to stop. It's okay. It's over. I'm sorry. My husband, a long time ago, he was the captain of a big pleasure boat. It was a gorgeous boat. He was so proud of it. But then there was the accident. So many people died. Everyone blamed my husband. It was so difficult for him. He started drinking heavily. Silly, isn't it? No matter how much you drink, you can't forget such a tragedy. But he met Elaine. She believed he was innocent. She helped him carry on.
This Elaine, she's dead?
Yes. Why is it that good people seem to die so early? What a waste. While Elaine's husband Patrick was traveling, a robber broke into their house. My husband has always said, if only I had been there for her. We should stop this conversation now. My husband is waiting. He can be so impatient, you know?
Remember that skeleton we came across earlier? Koudelka runs into him once again. This is Roger Bacon, someone who has seen many centuries and the source of humor in a game with little.
Daniel Scotius Erigina. Blameless soul. That man has not a heart to be found in his body. Though I do thank him for building the monastery here.
And you are?
Where are my manners? Hello! My name is Roger Bacon. I am a monk from the Franciscan order.
A monk? And I thought you were a mummy.
Yes, you are quite right in your assessment of me. Sun-dried kippers may be more pleasant to look at than my shriveled-up appearance. There was a time when I was hailed as the foremost warlock. But my profession seems to go in and out of fashion with the passage of time. Can't do much about that, can I?
You are a strange man. That's if you can be called a man.
I have given up being a man many hundreds of years ago. I am no longer a person, though I hesitate to answer questions regarding my existence because I have yet to figure out exactly what I am.
This is where some of the historical fiction elements of Koudelka rises. Roger Bacon was a real individual in the 13th century, one of those people who seemed to do everything. A real Renaissance man. From his contributions to science, philosophy, theology, alchemy, linguistics. He's credited as the first European to come across gunpowder. He took apart a Chinese firecracker to figure out how it worked, but realizing the dangers of gunpowder, he tried to keep the formula secret by enciphering it. Something that we'll see him do here in Koudelka. It's always fascinating to read about these polymaths in history with their contributions and output. Then you realize a couple factors. One, most of them were from wealthy families or benefactors, giving them the time and freedom to pursue their studies without worry. And two, they had far less distractions to deal with. In the 13th century, Roger Bacon didn't have to worry about distractions like the internet. With how Roger acts here, I could see him spending many hours shitposting on image boards instead of pursuing his studies if he had that option. Now, author Leo Tolstoy wrote War and Peace with 13 Children, but I like to think he would never have a chance if Twitter existed back then. Koudelka reunites with James and Edward, and we get further information about James being here. There's personal stakes here involving the dead Elaine and her husband Patrick, the owner of the monastery. He has a history with both of them that ties into his chosen path.
Tell me, who is Elaine? And Patrick? The caretakers told me that robbers broke into Elaine's home while Patrick was away and murdered her. Elaine was a benefactor for the caretakers. They took it upon themselves to murder every single robber and desperado that entered their grounds. It was a form of revenge for them.
I'm originally from Ireland, you see. Although small, my family had a successful business and was soon able to send me to school, which I loved from a very early age. I was soon accepted to a prestigious university in England, and with my parents' assistance, I made my way across the ocean. I met Patrick at university. We were both studying chemistry and embarking upon similar paths. About that same time, I began competing for the love of a beautiful woman, Elaine, and we had a falling out. I loved Elaine with all my heart. Omnia vincit amor. But love does not conquer all. I soon discovered that I lacked the social status and inheritance money necessary to properly care for someone so well-bred and sheltered as Elaine. I gave up my suit and made way for Patrick. To ease my pain, I joined the church and left the secular world behind. And being the perfectionist I am, the Vatican made me a bishop in charge of some very important matters. But it's been so hard to distance myself from one's emotional attachments. Although I had not seen them for 20 years, I wished them all the best in their life together. And if it hadn't been for this, I wouldn't have thought twice about seeing Patrick again. That's right, Patrick. How can this be? He promised me he was going to take care of Elaine and make her happy. What could have happened?
I love this story decision of giving James a personal reason for being here. It could have gone the way of having James be here only on behalf of the Vatican, but giving him more personal stakes being here adds far more weight to the story. And now we have the key to access Patrick's quarters in the monastery. Before we reach his quarters, we need to deal with the spirit of Charlotte, the girl we saw earlier. And this fight plays out in 2 different ways depending on if you've done optional content. There's some great build up to this room, and then we fight furniture as a boss fight. Now we've had fought furniture as base enemies throughout Koudelka, so having to fight some as a boss in an area dripping with atmosphere, it's a bit of a letdown. Couldn't we fight with other spirits or something a bit more intimidating? Well, you will have a more intimidating second fight with Charlotte as a monster, but you can avoid this fight and have a much better resolution to her story. Remember that stained glass earlier with the Greek letters? There's a room with a dresser locked up with those characters. If we find it, we could find letters inside from Charlotte's mother, Sophia. If you find these letters along with praying at her grave, you can avoid this second fight. Charlotte was born of royalty, but kept in secret and locked away as it was a secret love affair. Now as an FMB, it's noticeable that the voice acting here isn't up to the same standards as the rest of the game. Not bad by any stretch, but you can tell they record these separately and stitch them together. And it suffers from that quick cutaway to a loading screen. Still, it's a touching moment of freeing the spirit of Charlotte.
Charlotte, do you know what these are? They're letters from your mother.
My mother? Letters? There's so many!
Did you know that your mother was a queen of Hanover? It seems that after you were born in secret, your mother was locked up inside Alden Castle. Even while she was imprisoned there, she sent many letters to you here in the monastery. She never laid eyes on you, but she often imagined what you looked like. She dreamt of the day when she would be able to see you. Her letters never got to you, and she was never told of your death, so she continued to write you letters even after you died. Your mother loved you, Charlotte.
What? No, I can't take this now. She loved me? No, It's too scary. Hey, I feel warm. What's happening? No. Help me. You want me to forgive her? You love me? I hate you. Don't pray for me. You.
Charlotte, how does it feel to know you are loved?
On the topic of optional content, Koudelka does open up around the stretch to let you tackle a few. Not the same extent of a typical JRPG. What you see for the most part here is on the critical path, which works well for the blend of survival horror and JRPG. That gargoyle from earlier, you can now fight it as a party of 3 and kill it this time. That is, if you have the strength for it. He handed me my ass 6 ways from Sunday. In Patrick's quarters, we'll run across Old Man Roger once again and learn more about the emigre document. He's used it to keep himself alive all these years. I love the humor to this scene, and the element of characters entering and exiting the scene, giving off that stage-like atmosphere.
Very well then. If you were truly that Roger Bacon, then you'll be able to tell me with whom and where you studied.
Oh, that's easy. I entered Oxford in 1247 and studied under the tutelage of Robert Grosseteste. Although a good professor, I would not consider him to be a wise man. I penned my masterpiece, Opus Maius, as well as numerous other books on natural science. Being a visionary pioneer...
We can find some documents from Patrick, the owner of the monastery, and the husband of the dead spirit that brought Koudelka here, Elaine. The one James loved, but didn't have the stature to win her heart like Patrick did. Patrick wishes to use the emigre document to resurrect Elaine back to life. He tries the ritual from the document with no avail, becoming more and more desperate, starting with livestock for sacrifices, but then moving to people in their flesh. He realizes his grave sins, but that he's beyond redemption, and he's accepted that, only wanting Elaine back. At long last, Patrick is able to resurrect Elaine's body, but not her soul, something the emigre document cannot do. But her spirit still wanders, and through Koudelka's powers, she's able to channel Elaine for one last talk with James. She begs for us to kill her cursed body and free her spirit. Now, this is a heartbreaking scene where I'm absolutely floored by the time it wraps up. James knows what needs to be done, but he's a broken man. His cries out to Elaine are haunting, a man who's exceeded the lengths of his faith. Again, how these 3 never went on to have careers in voice acting after this still astounds me. Some of the best I've heard, having me go wow at the end of it.
He could not accept my death. He spent years and years perfecting his craft in wizardry and tried everything in his power to bring me back to life.
Resurrecting the dead? Is this for real? Hey, we're not talking about Frankenstein here.
Frankenstein?
That novel written about 100 years ago?
He was taking it very seriously. And he had found the key to actually make it happen.
The emigre document.
Yes. With Ogden's assistance and the powers from ancient druids, he held a resurrection ceremony in this monastery.
But something went wrong, didn't it?
He only resurrected my physical body. As you can see, my soul is still doomed to roaming the universe, forever separated from my body. And the terrifying thing is that my body was resurrected as a heartless monster.
Monster?
Although the monster may look like me, it is not me. Mr. O'Flaherty, please turn my body into ashes with your power.
Ashes? But if I do that, we won't be able to bring you back to life.
Mr. O'Flaherty, I was robbed of my life by those thieves, and I could hate them as mortal enemies. Choose to think that my death was preordained by the Lord. Please, do not mourn my death. It was wrong for Patrick to try to resurrect me, to undo the work of God. Please, do not be sad. Death is at the heart of God's reasoning. I urge you to destroy my body. Its existence defies the wise providence of heaven. It mustn't exist in this world.
Wait! Elaine! God! Curse! What a cruel world! I gave everything for your
happiness, and now what am I left with? I have no meaning in my life. Damn it! What have I been doing with my life? Elaine! Elaine!
And now we reach the scene I've been waiting for, the one I knew about before playing Koudelka. While waiting for James to put something together to blow open a door, Koudelka and Edward get drunk. What follows is the game's highlight, a near 9-minute scene of two drunk individuals letting their guard down. It starts with Edward talking about some of his excursions with women, to the point where I'm thinking, is something going to happen between them here? No, instead it takes things in a different direction.
And then, what happened to the girl Melanie?
She was gone the next morning. She left with practically everything in the room.
You don't have much luck with women, do you?
Well, you know what they say. The cleanest breakup is when a woman runs out on you.
What else is her statement? Oh, but you're lucky. I mean, to have so many people to kid around with.
We learn about Koudelka's background as a gypsy in her childhood.
Every gypsy is given a name at birth. My given name was Slato.
Slato?
Mm-hmm.
It's got a strange resonance to that name. What does it mean?
I can't tell you.
That too must be part of the law?
The law, it is.
Edward talks about coming from a wealthy family, but seeking adventure and excitement instead of his studies. He's envious of her freedom and her medium powers, which doesn't sit well with Koudelka, and what follows is, well, let's watch.
You can choose to live how you wish.
And who gave you the right to act as if you figured me out? Do you have any idea how I was raised? You make me laugh. Adventures. Please, you haven't the slightest clue. Do you have any idea how much pain my psychic powers have brought me? My father died when I was only a child. I predicted the exact time, place, and ending of my father's life. Imagine that, predicting your own father's death. You know, I was cursed as a child, being given powers not meant for a child. And my mother, oh, she was so frightened and so full of hatred for me. She tried to kill me with her very hands. The gypsy elders got together and decided to excommunicate me. I was only 9 then. Do you have any idea how a 9-year-old child survives without the help of a living soul? Treasures, you must be joking. Have you ever cried and begged for your next meal? Did you ever sell your body, seeking shelter from the frigid night air? I used to be just like Charlotte. When she cried and said, "No one has ever loved me." Oh, her words cut straight through me. It was me she was talking about. Just like her, I wish that everybody would die and harbored a hatred for all mankind. But you see, Charlotte has made her peace and gone to heaven. Me, I'm still alive and still all alone. No one has ever lent a helping hand. No one.
Koudelka, you?
I am not as free as you make me out to be. I am a poor, dirty,
ignorant woman who threw her gypsy pride to the dogs in order to live. But you see, even someone like me can do good. 'Cause with my powers, I can help ease the pain of others. That's when I feel good about living. I don't need to be loved. I just want my life to have some meaning. And just want someone to tell me they need me. You. No way will you ever understand.
To say the scene lived up to the hype is an understatement. It's some of the best voice acting I've come across. What starts as a lighthearted scene of two individuals drinking, letting their guard down, turns dark when one hits a nerve, where Koudelka bears her soul of what her life has been due to these powers. There is one thing I am curious about, that said. I'm wondering how this scene would play out without any music. The track is great in the background, adding to the tugging of heartstrings, but I'm also curious if they left it out and the only thing we heard were these two talking. How different would things be? So, funny timing while making this video, director Hiroki Kakuda tweeted a few things about the game, including this scene. They did 10 different takes of it. I'm curious to know which take they settled with. It wasn't a case of them splicing together different takes. What you see here is one take. We'll come across the corpse of Patrick, and now it's time to deal with Elaine's bodily form, the monstrosity without a soul. And this is where the game could end with you if you didn't pick up Koudelka's pendant from earlier. Elaine fries them with his attack, else the pendant will hold off the attack. Elaine's body will chase us up the stairs. We'll have a couple of fights with her on the way up. She's a step up from what we've come across before. Plus there's no healing between fights, which caught me off guard when I encountered her final form. As in the first time around, her first spell killed me before I could heal up. It's common for JRPG final bosses to be a bit of a victory lap. A challenge, but if you've done side quests and put time into leveling up, it's not much of an issue. And sure, you can grind out in Koudelka, but it's never been much of an issue here. It's not a necessity, and I didn't do any of it, which is why the gargoyle handed me my corpses on a silver plate. But here's the interesting thing, you get two endings here. One ending is from dying in the fight against Elaine, where James sacrifices himself to put an end to Elaine's monster.
Dear God, is this my fault? Do you blame me? Are you punishing me now because the path to my faith was tainted? I accept my fate. If it is your wish, then I accept my fate. He who has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is to go into captivity he will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword he will be killed. I am what I am. I am content with my lot. I have always loved you, Elaine.
Let's go home, James. Let's go home. I have such fond memories of those days.
No! Flames are coming this way!
Don't be silly. There must be something we can do. We'll be fine. Trust me.
Where Edward and Koudelka go their separate ways after a night together in a tent.
Ah, the sun came out. I prefer it a little hazier, though. Goodbye. We'll probably never see each other again.
Hey, your nickname. Slato? What does it mean? I haven't even asked you yet. Will you tell me?
It means treasure.
Oh, that's rich. I'll remember that. Treasure.
Is it okay, child, for you not to follow him?
Yeah, it's okay. I have a feeling that someday, somewhere, we'll meet again.
Treasure, huh? Seems like Edward got his share of treasure the previous night. Heyo! Or if you win this fight, you'll get the other ending, where James lives.
Hey, Koudelka. I wonder what she was about to say.
Dead people don't speak. It's just in your memories.
Huh? Is that how you explain what we just saw?
I guess.
Memories. Somebody told me that after a loved one's death, all we have is memories. In these, we maintain an eternal bond with the dead.
Interesting thing here is the canon ending is the quote-unquote bad ending, the one where you lose, due to how the events of the Shadow Hearts series plays out, but I have not played those games so I can't speak much on it. On the note of canon, there is another timeline that game director Hiroki Kikuta had in mind. He would leave Saknoth not long after the release of Koudelka, and the company would take things in a different direction with the series moving forward. But a sequel idea he had in mind would have Koudelka going to Paris the following year after the events of the first game. The third would be in Chicago during the 1970s, starring Koudelka's grandson. A fourth title would be in the 1980s in Japan, once again starring Koudelka's grandson. But you could get a more concrete glimpse of how things could have unfolded with the manga, a 3-volume release around the time frame of the game's release. If you didn't play Koudelka, you could still read it. It's more standalone, you don't need extensive knowledge of what came before. That said, you'll get more out of it if you did play the game. The events begin about a year after, with Koudelka escaping from an asylum. Framed for murder during her escape, she ends up losing her memories in the process. She falls under the care of a young boy named Joshua. Koudelka then falls under the care of prostitutes, a group Joshua knows through his dead mother. Pregnant prostitutes are being kidnapped by some unknown entity, and Koudelka sets off to help them out, while regaining her memories. So how's the manga? It's fine. Nothing special, nothing terrible. It was an enjoyable read, but not essential. Again, it's not canon due to how the Shadow Hearts series plays out. Koudelka has much more of a, manga appearance. The same goes for her personality. She's much more, for lack of a better term, a kind manga protagonist. Now, she did lose her memories in this escape from the asylum. She's been locked up for a year. She grew as a character over the course of Koudelka. So she does feel like a different character altogether at points. I'm not sure if the game director Hiroki Kikuta had any oversight on this manga. Not a total shift in character, but it is more noticeable. There are some twists and turns to the story, including an eye-rolling evil twin character twist. Not Koudelka herself, someone else in the story. Her journey will have her return to the monastery and run into Roger Bacon once again. A man related to Joshua, the one Koudelka fell in with, seeks out to do something similar to what Patrick had in mind in the original game. So if you want to see a bit of an alternative timeline of how the series could have gone, this was supposed to address a gap between Koudelka 1 and 2, check out the manga. It's a brisk, enjoyable read. So while it does stumble in some areas, Koudelka is a unique blending of the survival horror genre with the JRPG. Even with a compromised end result, the game does some interesting things with its combat system. But as brought up, it's not the game's strengths. It's the narrative of Koudelka that makes it such a memorable, engaging title, where I wouldn't have minded another act or so, or another disc. Where I couldn't wait to see the next scene between these three incredible characters. Koudelka is one of the more mature stories I've come across in the game on its execution. It's not a complex tale with a large band of characters. It keeps it small and personal. Add that in with the theatrical approach to its scenes, along with some of the best voice acting you'll ever hear, and you end up with one unforgettable experience. Thanks for watching. Special shout out to my fellow Boulder Punchers for the extra support on Patreon or YouTube memberships. For those in the thank you for your patronage tier, American Boot, Tom Terrible. For those in the Now This Is Boulder Punching tier, Ethan, the Madman in Waco. For those in the My Vision is Augmented tier, Nico Pero, Sam Jones, BBF in Bloxburg, Will Han. If you'd like to further support the channel, consider joining your fellow Boulder Punchers through Patreon or a YouTube membership. You'll get early access to videos, be featured in the credits, receive periodic newsletter updates, and my undying gratitude. Thanks again.
In these crazy times, young people push themselves too much.